and welcome to the Plant School podcast. I'm Rachel Tenney, and here we learn all about plants, how they work, how to care for them, and it's all taught in a way that anyone from beginner to expert can listen to, understand, and enjoy. So I hope that you will join me in Plant School. Hello and welcome to the Plant School podcast. Today we're going to be talking all about the rubber tree or the Ficus elastica. We're going to be going over what this plant is, what it symbolizes, where it came from, its history, and then in the latter half of this episode we're going to talk about how to care for a rubber tree, how to keep it happy and healthy. Before we dive into all of that, I'm going to do what I do in every episode. I'm going to quickly do our giveaway winners. How this works is I choose two people. They will win a gift card from me to them so that they can go plant shopping. And I choose one winner from Spotify, someone who has commented on the most recent episode. So if you want to enter in, go ahead and scroll down and comment on this episode. Maybe let me know if you have a rubber tree, if you want to get one. Leave some emojis, just whatever you feel like. Any comment will enter you in. Or if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, I also choose a winner from over there as well. All you need to do is leave a written review and that will enter you in over there. So for today's winners, starting with Apple Podcasts, their username is The Magic of Macy. And she said, I've been listening to this podcast for a year and it never ceases to inspire me. I love how approachable all of the advice is and I enjoy learning about the history of certain plants as well. Anytime I want to listen to something cozy yet informative, I turn to this podcast. It always makes me happy. Can't wait for more episodes. Thank you so much, Macy, for that really kind review. If you could go ahead and email me at tennyplants@gmail.com. That's TENNEY plants@gmail.com. I will get you set up with your gift card so that you can go plant shopping. Moving over to Spotify, I'm looking at the comments from our latest episode, which this last one was all about variegated monsteras. And our winner today, their username is Shantae. And they said, I remember that 3 years ago, I worked at a greenhouse and I loved working while listening to the new episodes. I even enjoyed the old episodes with your husband. Shantae, you are an OG listener if you remember those episodes with my husband. I really appreciate you. For those that may be unfamiliar, I started this podcast with the help of my husband, and the whole idea was that he, knowing nothing about plants, would ask me questions about a certain topic or a certain plant, and that was kind of the layout for the podcast. We have come a long way since then. Because this is not my husband's passion project, he quickly lost steam for it, which is like totally fine. There were no hard feelings at all, so he stepped away. I have continued since, and I ended up archiving those first 50 episodes. Yes, sometimes questions pop up about that, of where did they go, why can't I see them? But I'm telling you, this podcast has changed so much. I had so many people listening to my first few episodes, being turned off by it because they thought it was something completely different from what it is now. And so I just had to make that decision. But it sounds like Shantae remembers it. And that is so crazy and so fun. They listened to it back then and now they're back. So Shantae, if you could also email me at tennyplants@gmail.com. and I'll get you set up with a gift card to your favorite local plant store and you can go plant shopping on me as well. All right, and like I said, if you want to win next week's giveaway, leave a review on Apple Podcasts if that's where you're listening, or if you're listening on Spotify, go ahead and leave a comment on this episode and that will enter you in. Okay, and last thing before I start the meat of this episode, I will be very quick about this, but I am planning a trip to England for the Chelsea Flower Show. I have the official dates now, we have an itinerary, and booking is going to be opening up so soon. In fact, chances are by the time you are listening to this, that booking is open now. So I'm going to include a link in the show notes. And this whole trip, it's from May 18th to the 25th of 2027, so next May. And we are going to the Chelsea Flower Show. We are going to some of my favorite gardens near London. We're going all around the countryside. We're going to Kew. It is going to be so much fun. Even some of the accommodations that we have are botanically themed. We're going to restaurants that are farm to table restaurants. It's just going to be such a fun trip. If you have any interest, if that sounds like something that you would enjoy, any adult is welcome. I will include the link down below to sign up with your email for it. And when it is open to book, I will probably delete the email link and put in the booking link so that you can just view all the details, decide if you want to come. If not, no worries. Maybe we could catch you next year. Hopefully this becomes a yearly tradition that we can do. But I am so excited for it. And with you as a listener being probably a like-minded person of enjoying gardens and nature, plants, botany, all of that good stuff, of course I'm going to extend the invitation to my audience. All right, enough chit-chatting. Let's get into the rubber tree, starting with the question of what is a rubber tree? So the scientific name for them is Ficus elastica. Comes from the Moriaceae family. Common names include, of course, the rubber tree, though that is not to be confused with Peperomia obtusifolia, which is often called the rubber plant. So sometimes when you Google rubber tree, it gets confused with the rubber plant, but it is a completely different plant. Other common names for Ficus elastica is the India rubber plant, India rubber fig, or just rubber fig. And these common names, every single one of them includes the word rubber. That is because if you were to break the rubber tree, you will see this milky white latex that, yes, you could use to make rubber. Fun fact, one of my children broke off a leaf of my rubber tree, just running around my house, doing who knows what, and I didn't notice it until I saw this big white puddle on my floor and was so confused on what it was. I thought it was milk at first, but as I went to wipe it, it was thick and rubbery, and then that's when I realized, oh, this came from my rubber tree leaking out sap after my kid knocked off a leaf. And we will talk more about that feature when we talk about its history. But moving on to describe the rubber tree, they do flower, but rarely will it happen indoors. And these flowers are really unique. And this is something that most all figs have unique about them, where they require a particular species of fig wasp. So the rubber tree is no different. It is a fig, just like your fiddle leaf figs or your edible figs that you can eat, also known as Ficus caraca. All of these figs have flowers that are specifically designed for a fig wasp. So for the rubber fig, the type of fig wasp that pollinates with it is Platyscapa clavigera. That might be completely wrong. Sometimes I feel like I have a pretty good handle on scientific names for plants, but when it comes to insects, that is a whole new world for me. But this fig wasp, it has co-evolved with the rubber tree so that it can pollinate it. And it is the only one that does so. And when that flower is fertilized, it will produce a small yellow-green oval fig. It is barely edible. It's not the greatest. There's not much fleshiness to this fig. I apologize for saying fleshiness because I really hate that word. Moving on, let's talk about what they symbolize. So the rubber tree is known to symbolize abundance, happiness, and wealth, and it is also used in feng shui. It is believed to bring positive energy and good luck to a home, which is great. I hope it does so for my home, because this is actually a plant that I have. I feel like I've been covering a lot of plants that I don't own, but I do own a rubber tree. Moving on to the next question, which is where did they originate? So the rubber tree or rubber fig is native to eastern parts of South and Southeast Asia, extending from Nepal in the north to Indonesia, Bhutan, northeastern India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, Yunnan in China, and also Malaysia. But it has become naturalized in other areas of the world. So it will grow in these places as well, including Sri Lanka, the West Indies, and the U.S. state of Florida. I have never been to Florida, but I tell you what, it is on my bucket list simply because of the plant life that exists there. I see all the plant influencers in Florida and all the tropical plants that they have growing in their yards, which normally just exist as houseplants in all other parts of the US, and I am just so jealous of that. I think it is so fun. But it is also in other parts of the world as an introduced species, not naturalized. So you can also find them in Hawaii. And in Europe, you can even find them in mild locations throughout the Mediterranean basin. In the wild, they grow up to 50 to 100 feet tall and wide. No, I am not joking. These are massive, massive trees in the wild. They have these aerial roots that form these trunks, kind of similar to the banyan tree, just these really massive aerial root trunks. And this makes sense because Ficus elastica, or our rubber tree, is in the banyan group of figs. When I read this, I did have to go and look at images because I literally thought it was a typo that they grow 50 to 100 feet tall and wide. But no, look it up. They are just massive trees in the wild. Okay, let's go to my favorite part. Let's talk about their history. And man, does the rubber tree have a lot of history. So their sap, being quite rubbery, it does have very deep historical roots, being used to make rubber, and once was the most common plant in the Sumatra and Malay Peninsula for rubber tapping. The native people of Assam would make multiple horizontal gouges in the bark, and from those horizontal cuts, the liquid latex would just start dripping out naturally, and they would place down these bamboo mats below the cuts. And from there, those drippings were able to be used to make rubber. And these trees, they could only be tapped for about a year before needing a 2-year rest. So there was a sort of strategy to this whole thing. And it all came to a halt due to the para tree being introduced from Brazil in the late 1800s. The para tree is what is used for rubber today. It is just so much more effective than the Ficus elastica, and that's kind of why it took over. By the 19th century, European plantation owners came in and established new large tea and rubber plantations. These were huge money-making markets, and since the climate was conducive to these trees, they kind of pushed the rubber tree to the side and started using the para tree. But the rubber tree, it also has ties to traditional medicine by the native people. They would use it for pain, rheumatism, diarrhea, hypertension, skin allergies, anemia, wounds, hernias, and hemorrhoids. A whole slew of things. They were able to take different parts of this plant to treat those ailments. And in its native areas, like India, those big aerial roots, they would take the ones that were smaller and that could still move. They hadn't attached themselves into the ground, and they would use them to create living bridges where they would weave the roots together into bridges over chasms, over canyons. And it's actually really cool. There's even an illustration that is dated from 1854 of an Indian rubber tree being used to make a living bridge. And some of these living bridges are still around today, and they are over 100 years old, all made from the Ficus elastica, or the rubber tree. Moving along, this plant was brought to Europe in the 19th century, where it became popular as an ornamental plant, mostly because it had those really attractive, large, glossy leaves. It was very adaptable to different environments, and it was very low maintenance. It was formally named by the Scottish botanist William Roxburgh in 1814. And it became quite prominent during the Victorian era in Europe, where indoor gardening and ornamental plants were highly fashionable, but due to their homes being a little bit drafty, they weren't as airtight and heated like they are today. You really had to have a tough plant in the Victorian era to survive. And so that's just a testament to the rubber tree's adaptability and its vigor that it could survive in Europe in the Victorian era. And moving to more recent history, the rubber tree is one of those included in the 1989 NASA study. They found the Ficus elastica to be effective at removing toxins like formaldehyde, xylene, and toluene from the air. And I know I talk about this every time and you're probably sick of it, but I just think of the people who this may be their first episode, and I just gotta let them know. For all of you that this is your first episode, this is a soapbox I often get on, because this 1989 NASA study was done in an enclosed environment. And yes, these plants that they brought do clean the air. But the problem is, a lot of people like to take this study and apply it to our homes and say, it cleans the air in our homes, you should buy it, they're amazing. But here's the problem. Our homes are not an enclosed environment. We don't live in airtight boxes. We have doors, we have windows, we have AC and heating, and air is constantly going in and out of our homes. Therefore, if you wanted your plants to clean the air, you would need an enormous amount of houseplants to have any effect at all. And at that point, you would probably get problems with mold. It would become a full-time job just watering them all. It would get so messy. So yes, these plants clean the air, but no, it does not apply to our homes. So when you see it on a tag that this houseplant helps clean the air, or you see it on a blog, or some plant influencer is telling you that, just take it with a grain of salt, because they do not actually effectively clean the air in your home. And modern research confirms that. And now I will step off my soapbox. Let's talk about some other studies that the Ficus elastica has been a part of. So I found one that was really interesting from 2005, where they were looking at some old studies. They were looking at these Singapore studies in the 1930s that suggested that the pollinator of Ficus elastica that we talked about, it's just that one wasp, right? It was extinct in the wild. There were no more of them. But this 2005 study found that wild seedlings of Ficus elastica began to appear in Singapore. And this indicated that there must be a pollinator to create these wild seedlings. They were able to successfully identify the pollinator. As that wasp I mentioned, the Platyscapa clavigera, they thought it had just been extinct because that older study had shown that these wild Ficus elastica species had gone unpollinated for about 70 years. But it turns out that wasp was around, maybe in very few population, maybe it was gone from that part of the world for a while. But this study from 2005 showing that the wasp was indeed back and pollinating the Ficus elastica, even though that 1930 study said, no, they're probably all gone. It has been so many years since we've seen one get pollinated in the wild. It just shows the fig's ability to wait for its pollinator, and also shows just how those really highly specific interactions between this one species of fig and this one species of wasp can be evolutionarily stable. It can last for time because this fig is able to wait for its specific pollinator for decades and decades. I just found that so interesting. And of course, there have been studies testing its use today in the manufacturing of modern rubber, but there unfortunately have been no significant results because they just don't compare to its rival plants, which is the para tree. Modern studies have also been done to test its efficacy as a medicinal plant and see how well it does at helping the human body, and it has been shown to have some antioxidant activities. It can be used to help skin infections and skin allergies, as well as showing some promise as a diuretic agent, meaning it helps you pee. But all of these studies are very early, and further testing is ongoing as we speak. Another study that I saw also showed that the Ficus elastica has antimicrobial activity and a really high calorific value, and not really for human consumption, but it could be used as a sort of intermediate energy source instead of fossil fuel. Lots of really fun, exciting early research. And today there are a lot of different cultivars of the rubber tree. There's the Decora. It is available most everywhere, has these very dark leaves with creamy white midribs. It's very striking. There's the Dosheri, which has cream and gray variegated leaves with pink ribs. There's also the Folius Aureo marginata, and it has these gold margin leaves. Another one is the Robusta. These leaves are very large, up to like 18 inches long, and it does very well in low light. There's the Rubra. These leaves are reddish when they're young, and then they turn this deep green with red edges. And another one is the Tricolor. I think this might be the one that I have, but this one has green leaves with cream and pink patches. A lot of really fun varieties and really interesting coloring. And with that, we are kind of ready to move into the care guide portion of this episode, starting with the question of how to water one. So you want to water a rubber tree when the top few inches of the soil feel dry. Just stick your finger in there. No need for a moisture meter. If it feels dry, those top few inches, it needs some water. If it still feels moist, wait a few more days. If it feels completely wet, hold off on watering for a while. They do great with the average home humidity. Getting a humidifier can help in those drier winter months. If it is struggling with low humidity, sometimes you will notice that by it having these brown, crispy leaf edges. And if you're ever dealing with a symptom for your houseplant, it doesn't even have to be a rubber tree, but just on this topic of when houseplants can be struggling with something and you are confused on what it might be, you just don't know what's going on, I have created a little help guide of what is wrong with my houseplant. I do link it in the show notes, so if you are ever confused about your houseplant, that little help guide can be a great starting place to figuring out what your houseplant is dealing with, how to solve it, and how to go from there. And moving on to lighting, what it needs there, it needs plenty of bright and direct sun. Too harsh of like direct sun, midday sun can really scorch the leaves and cause leaf burn. If you notice that, definitely move it to a place where it's not getting so much direct sun, or you can put a sheer curtain between it and the light source. They do pretty well adapting to lower light conditions. They won't do their best, I will say. Lower light can cause some leaf loss. So if you want a really full rubber tree, I definitely recommend giving it a lot of bright and direct light or giving it some artificial light, which is what I'm doing because most all my windows are full of houseplants and my rubber tree did not fit in any existing windows. So I definitely had to use some artificial light. Rubber trees don't love drafty areas or heating vents. Both those can cause leaf loss. This is pretty typical for your Ficus species. Fiddle-leaf figs are the same way, and it's very noticeable to lose a fiddle-leaf fig leaf because they are so large. I think the rubber trees may be a little more forgiving because their leaves aren't quite as big, but it is still something you want to avoid. They do prefer temperatures between 65 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 18 to 30 degrees Celsius. And on that topic of them losing leaves, also moving them can cause stress and cause them to lose leaves as well. So if you were to move it to a new spot and a few leaves drop off, don't panic. That is usually just it acclimating to the new area. Moving on to how to fertilize them, you want to fertilize them when they're actively growing. That's usually in the spring and summer, but it just depends where on the globe you live. And you want to do it once a month with a 10-10-10 fertilizer or 20-20-20. Those numbers just refer to the NPK value or nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium value in the fertilizer. It is the percentage of the active ingredients within your fertilizer. So for example, a 20-20-20 is 20% nitrogen, 20% phosphorus, 20% potassium. Moving on to how to repot one and what kind of soil it likes. So they do prefer a well-draining houseplant mix or a succulent mix if you can. A lot of people like to amend their soil with extra perlite or even orchid bark just to really help aid in aeration. Using a heavy soil is very likely to cause root rot, which we do not want. You will notice that with stems starting to feel mushy, leaves turning yellow. That is a sign of root rot, and you want to check to see if the soil is overly saturated. Check to see if you have any black or mushy roots and trim those off. And you can even replace its soil as well to really help it bounce back if you're dealing with a really bad case of root rot. Repotting is best done in spring if you are noticing signs that it is ready. Those signs include roots coming out the bottom of the pot. Your soil is drying out super fast. Usually that's because there's not too much soil left in the pot. It's mostly all roots, and they are pretty fast growers. So expect to be repotting them about every 1 to 3 years, just depending on how well it is growing. Moving on, let's talk about how to prune one, because these guys can get pretty big. If they get 50 to 100 feet in the wild, you know it can get pretty big in your house. Not that big, but decently big for a houseplant. So they easily grow anywhere from 6 to 10 feet tall indoors, so you can prune them to reduce their size. Not a whole lot of people have homes with 10-foot ceilings, so there may come a time that you need to cut it, and that's totally fine to do. Pruning that main branch can actually encourage more branching and a bushier growing habit, which can be desirable if your rubber tree is looking kind of leggy and bare. These plants can be propagated. You can take a stem cutting or you can even do a tip cutting. Leaf cuttings are not a viable option. You need to have a portion of the stem in there. You can treat it with rooting powder, that is recommended, and place it in water or place it in a moist soil medium of your choice. Another option with rubber trees that I find so much fun is air layering. This is where you are removing that outer layer of bark and you take sphagnum moss, you can take soil, and you kind of ball it up around that ring of bark that you removed. So place it around there, wrap it up with some saran wrap so it doesn't just fall off, and attach it with twisty ties on like the top and the bottom. You keep that soil or you keep that moss moist at all times. And from there, it will start to grow roots. And once it has a decent amount, you can cut below that area and you have like a new little mini tree. I did this in class once with a Benjamin ficus or Ficus benjamina, and I still have it to this day. It was this massive Benjamin ficus, and we were all able to air layer and take pieces of it home, and mine is still doing pretty good. Moving on from propagation to talk about what pests they deal with, and I only have 2 more questions after this, but the kind of pests they deal with most often is mealybug, scale, thrips, and spider mites. And what you can do about this from least invasive to most invasive, I would say put them in a shower and try to shower them off with room temperature water. Next, you could rub them off with a cotton ball. What I like to do is to dip a cotton swab or cotton ball in diluted rubbing alcohol, and I can remove them by hand with that. Neem oil is another great option. And lastly, insecticidal oil or insecticidal soap can be really effective at getting rid of all these pests. All right, my second to last question. This is just a time for some extra care tips. So they do have large leaves. You want to dust them. It is very recommended so that they can photosynthesize to their full ability. Next extra tip, they are toxic to pets. That latex rubbery sap can cause skin irritation, upset stomachs if it's ingested, so definitely keep it away from curious pets. And last extra tip is they do get so tall that it is often recommended to use a stake to help support them, just so that they stay upright and they don't flop over and damage their main stem or trunk. And my last question is, how long do they live? So outside, in the wild, they can live for up to 100 years, which makes sense. We have those living rubber tree bridges that have been around for over 100 years. But when you bring them indoors, it's a little bit different. Normally not quite 100 years, but what is typical for them is anywhere from 10 to 30 years if they are getting the proper care. And I am confident that you can have your rubber tree live in that typical lifespan of 10 to 30 years, because now you know all the proper care for your Ficus elastica. Thank you so much for listening to the Plant School podcast. I truly appreciate you being here, and I hope that you will join me in 2 weeks for a brand new episode. Thank you so much for being here and for listening to the Plant School podcast. I hope that you will join me for our next episode. And if you would like to support this podcast and keep it going, there's a link down in the show notes of this episode where you can donate to this podcast, and I really appreciate all that help. Or you can go to my merch store, which is also linked in the notes of this episode, and you can find some really cool plant-related shirts and stickers. And if you want to support the podcast but spend no money, feel free to share it with a friend, leave a review. All these things greatly help me out and allow me to keep doing this. Again, thank you so much for listening and for being here at the Plant School podcast.